Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm so excited. We have people from all around the world joining us today. This is the TOS, the Oceanography Society, virtual panel for World Oceans Day, titled Using Ocean and Environmental Data to Address Socio-Economic Challenges. I'm Chrissy Hernandez. I've been the TOS student rep for the past couple of years. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here. A couple of ground rules before we get started. Please keep your microphone muted until the question and answer period, which will be after the speakers give their talks. Please use the chat actively throughout to respectfully interact with other participants, to tell us where you're coming from, anything. We really encourage you to use the chat as much as you want. This webinar is being recorded. If you're not comfortable with being recorded, feel free to turn off your camera. It'll mostly be the speakers and then whoever turns their video and microphone on during the Q&A period. Also, we're moderating this webinar. So those of us that are co-hosts have the ability to remove people from the call if anything comes up. And if you personally have any issue, we want this to be safe and respectful, send a private message to me, Chrissy Hernandez, or Jenny Ramarui to let people, and we'll help you resolve whatever's going on. And then later during the Q&A session, you can use the raise hand feature, or you can type your question into the chat. So I'd like to give a little bit of background on the Oceanography Society. We're really excited to have a big audience today and to have a wide range of people. So maybe not everyone here knows about the Oceanography Society specifically. TOS is a professional society for students, faculty, and professionals working in the field of oceanography. And the Oceanography Society, or we often say TOS, was founded in 1988 to advance oceanographic research, technology, and education, and to disseminate knowledge of oceanography and its application through research and education. We encourage participation from all nations, and student membership is free. So if you want to learn more and become a member, you can visit us at tos.org. And I'm going to drop a couple of links into the chat once I'm done giving these opening remarks. I forgot to mention also that since we're recording this, we'll make the recording available afterwards on our YouTube page, and I'll give you the link to that as well. This event in particular is being put on by the TOS Student Committee, and I want to highlight them a little bit. We have 5 subcommittees that are focused on specific topics and activities. These include social events, which is the group running this event today, social media, which folks from that group have been involved in helping to advertise this event. We have a job opportunities subcommittee, which has been chaired by Kitty Cam and has done really awesome work improving the TOS website and how it advertises job opportunities for students and early career folks. We also have done some work around coding resources, and we also send out a newsletter. We'd love to get some more people involved, and you can learn more at tos.org/TOS Student Committee. So we've been working on holding virtual events for World Oceans Day. This is our 2nd annual event. Last summer, it was held in August, but was still around the theme of World Oceans Day and Sustainable Development Goals. We're really excited that this year our event is falling on World Oceans Day, and we're super excited about our speakers. I also want to say a special thank you to Kaushal, Samara, and Prem for all of their work to make this event a reality. And also to a lot of the support we got from the TOS side, from Jenny Ramarui, who is the TOS Executive Director, Ellen Capel, the editor of Oceanography magazine, and Johanna Adams, who does web design and graphic design for TOS. So the program for this event will have about a 15-minute presentation by Dr. Payal Parekh, followed by about a 15-minute presentation by Dr. James Watson. And then we have about a 25-minute Q&A period. So without any further ado, let me stop sharing and hand the floor over to Kaushal, who will introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Chrissy. Both our panelists, Payal and James, are oceanographers by training. So Payal did her PhD in climate science and ocean chemistry from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. She is a climate justice activist, and her work is backed by both science and data. She has worked in leadership positions at a number of international environmental NGOs while also staying active in several grassroots movements. James did his doctoral work in marine science at the University of California at Santa Barbara. He is currently an assistant professor at the Oregon State University and also the CEO and co-founder of the Prediction Lab. James develops socio-environmental models to address real-world policies and is known for combining the best practices from academia and private sector to solve problems. He's also one of the 3 scientists who won the Oceanography Society's Early Career Award in 2021. We're very happy to have both of you on the panel. Now we'll hear from our speakers, and after that, the discussion will be open for questions. Please feel free to drop your questions in the chat during the presentation. And if you have a question for a particular panelist, do mention their name in front of your questions. You can also hold off on putting questions in the chat and can ask your questions directly during the Q&A. Without any more delay, I'll hand over the podium to Payal.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. Yeah, so I think I want to first of all really thank Kaushal and Chrissy for this invitation. They've done an amazing job organizing it. Everything worked without a hitch. So I'm thankful for that. And even though I don't work as an oceanographer or a climate scientist anymore, I'm always very glad to be in the community of all of you. So I'm going to talk about data, not even necessarily all of it is environmental data, but what's used for social change. And all of you know, you're scientists or scientists in training. All of you, some of you generate data with a model, others go out in the field and collect it. And we know the reason that we do this, right? It's because our perception of the world is based on our observations, on data that we collect. And we know that it's extremely important that we do this. And of course, by having this data, it can impact the decisions we make. So for example, if I am not feeling well, I'm going to want to know if a doctor tells me I should take a medication, is that really going to help me? Does it have a good success rate? And what are the side effects? But we also know how data is used and presented as key. In particular, in the discussion around climate change, it became very, very contested issue, even though the science was clear. And that's because others cherry-picked data or presented data in such a way that made it seem as if it was showing us something else. I don't think any of this is new to all of you, but I think it's always important to remember this, because while we can say that data is objective, it constantly intersects with our values and our experiences, in particular for socioeconomic issues. For your research, probably a little bit less, but nevertheless, you know, we have opinions, we have things that are important to us. And then suddenly this data is not processed in the same way. And this is actually a huge issue in terms of social issues, as well as environmental issues, which always also have a social impact or a social aspect. So the reason I left oceanography was not that I didn't like it. And I think I was fairly good at it. I managed to get my PhD and managed to do a postdoc, but it was actually much more because I looked at data, but not necessarily, some of it is environmental data, but first of all, to look at the climate change vulnerability index. This is essentially a compilation of which countries are most vulnerable. This is not raw data, right? It's taking data and combining different sources of data, predictions of sea level rise, temperature rise, of precipitation patterns. And what we see, though, is that the poorest countries in the world, in particular in sub-Saharan Africa, are the most vulnerable. Yet let's look on the right-hand side at the per capita CO2 emissions, and this is from 2020. And what we see is Africa has the lowest CO2 emissions. And for me, being from India, I saw that India had relatively low CO2 emissions and was relatively vulnerable. And being from now what soon to be the largest population in the world of close to 1.4 billion people, and to have hundreds of millions of people living in poverty, this became for me very clear that I would rather use this personal decision, my expertise on dealing with this issue of this injustice, because those communities that have done the least to destroy the planet are facing the worst impacts. And on top of that, they do not have if we look at this next image on the right here, they do not have the resources to adapt or to become more resilient. And so what we see on the right-hand side is how living on less than $3.20 is primarily in Africa, also to some extent in India, and the wealthy countries such as Australia, United States, Canada, who have burned the most per capita, also have the richest communities. And so this is what happens when you take data that some of it is environmental, CO2 emissions, some of it is economic data, some of it is taking research in the climate sciences and putting it into a model to develop a vulnerability index, that we start to actually get a picture of what does it mean to live in this world. It means this world is very unequal, and it means that it's very much tied to economics. And this is what I found very fascinating about starting to work more as an activist and a campaigner, because I was so used to doing running my models in the MIT GCM, and I was creating that data, and then I was creating, my charts and graphs and whatever, but it was not very interdisciplinary. I'm just going to check the time that I don't go over. And so this is very interesting, because for those who are activists trying to change the world, most of them don't come from the sciences. Most of them are terrible with data. But what's come up instead are data sources that have actually done, churned the information, have found compelling ways to show that data. And I thought I'll show you a couple of these. I probably don't have time to show all of them, but I think, which one should I show? Let's see this one. Let's see what we've got here, Our World in Data. And I will send my presentation afterwards. Oh yes, I thought because of being oceanographers, this is Our World in Data is really there. All the people who work there are mathematicians, statisticians, scientists, and they try to make data that's useful for not just social change, but data that's applicable to world problems. And they try to, as you see here, present it in a way that actually is easy to understand. So what we see here, right, on the left-hand side with the green bar is that's like the primary plastic production per year. And then we see, okay, how much is waste? And actually it exceeds the production, right? And so it means it's probably about the same. And then you go down this chain of what's happening at the coasts, how much of that is mismanaged, and how much of it falls into the ocean. And this gives people a sense of where it's coming from, where it's going. And you also see that you've got 2 billion people, 1/4 of the Earth's population is living within 50 kilometers of a coastline. So it means that they are also interacting with a lot of plastic. So these are the kind of things that come up. Maybe I'll show one more. Let's see here. Sorry, I had them all. Okay, I'll go back to the presentation quickly. This one is a very interesting one. So Carbon Brief does lots related to climate and energy. I think it's just loading up. And this is where they show basically where coal power and coal plants are coming up. And this is interesting because naturally it's not really in Europe and North America because they're already very advanced economies, but it's in particular India and China. So the countries with the 2 largest populations are actually bringing up a lot of coal plants. And why is this interesting for activists? It's interesting because we know that we have to get off of coal, oil, and gas very fast. And that the minute a coal plant is built, you've locked in a dirty and old technology for 25 years. Because nobody's going to build a coal plant and then 1 year later, 2 years later, stop burning coal. And then, so this was information that I, with friends in India, we used to bring together a lot of the communities in India that were in the coal belt, who are mostly indigenous communities. And some of them had already started fighting the companies. Others didn't realize this was coming. And it allowed us to inform people. It allowed us to get people in Delhi to do lobbying at the national level. And it allowed us to get information to the local communities that were fighting and make our case about why they must fight these plants, not just for their livelihood and their culture, but because it's actually a global problem. And India actually is more vulnerable to climate. So this cannot be the way. And if we had not seen this data, I mean, probably at some point it would have happened, but we were able to intervene more quickly because we actually saw the data, and we could see, again, you can map the socio-economic status of a country along with whether it's burning coal or not. In South America and most of Africa, you don't have that much. That's why there's not much there. But you see in Southern Africa that it's also happening there. And maybe, I think just in the, 1 second, I just got rid of my presentation. Pardon me. I just pulled up my presentation very quickly again. Okay, here we go. It's here. Sorry about this. Clicked on the wrong tab. Uh-oh. So these are just a couple of examples to show you what kind of data is out there for campaigners to use. Sorry, I think my internet connection must be a bit slow. Okay, there we go. Yeah, and there's a couple other that are also quite good. But as I kind of already mentioned, this was very much helps with communication and decision making. So one is India's decision to add new coal plants led to international and national campaigners targeting them. When campaigners talk about climate justice, it's actually this nexus of poverty, climate vulnerability, CO2 emissions that underlies that, whether they know it or not. And also something that's very different from a scientific perspective is when you map these projects and you realize that there are a few companies in the world that are creating them, you start to get together with the other activists, and it helps to create international networks so that we can exchange ideas, we can exchange information about the same culprits. And this data is what underlies developing good messaging. And this is not from the climate realm, but there was a big campaign 20 years ago to drop the debt of countries in the global south. And this came about because some economists started mapping and realizing that countries are not able to pay down their debt. They're simply paying the interest. And this can't continue because the World Bank is not fulfilling its objective of getting people out of poverty. And campaigners took that information and thought, how do we explain this to communities, and in particular global north communities that don't want to pay for the global south, that they should drop the debt. But that drop the debt, nobody likes debt. People know about debt. And it worked very well. It was very catchy, but it was actually based on very strong economic data. And finally, I think it's so great that so many of you are studying ocean sciences, because we need that. It's important. But there's a lot of things that all of you could do to support campaigns and movements in their work. As I mentioned a couple of times, activists are not data savvy. So if you're able to help them collect and make sense of data, that is really invaluable. And I would argue for all of you, especially this generation, that you really think about how do you present your data so that it's relevant and that non-experts can understand. Because I think a lot of what you do research on is very important for understanding the world and for climate and environmental issues. But if you don't figure out a way to present it with simple language, also in a way similar to that chart that we saw for looking at plastic pollution, it can't have the impact, at least in the political and social realm, that it could. So with that, I will end, and I look forward to hearing James talk and your questions afterwards.
Thank you so much, Payal. Next, we have James.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Payal, thank you so much for that talk. It was really cool to see all of this work that you're doing and the important messages in your talk. Chrissy, Kaushal, thank you so much for organizing this session. These are really important. I think it's really important to have these kinds of conversations, especially with the students coming through in oceanography and marine sciences more broadly. So super happy to be here. Jenny, also, thank you. Great to meet you as well in person, not just by email. All right, so anyway, without much further ado. Chrissy, give me a thumbs up. Can you see that? Okay, great. All right. Well, some of you might not know this, but the original title of the session was "Why Do We Gather Data About the Oceans?" And I love this title actually. And so, again, because it's such an obvious question, it doesn't actually get asked or even answered that often. So I've put together a couple of slides to actually try and answer this question from a very basic or high level perspective, revisiting almost the philosophy or motivation behind why we do what we do. Okay, and actually, I mean, there was another motivation. I like this title because it reminded me of all the times I got massively seasick out on the oceans, on the few times that I went out to help collect stuff, data. And contrary to what I just said just now, and what you might be thinking, just like my son here, who got massively motion sick because of this epic spin that he did, getting seasick and getting data can be great fun. And this might seem trite, but I wanted to start with this because actually it's important to have fun. We don't get paid enough not to have fun in the work that we do. So first off, it's important to get your data because it can be fun. Second, though, in here, getting your own data will give you an appreciation of the system that you're studying, way beyond what you would get just from looking at the numbers. Another lesson that I've learned is it's an appreciation of how hard it is to get good data, actually. And this is really important when working in interdisciplinary teams that comprise both modelers and empiricists. We can talk more about that afterwards and how that looks or has looked for me. So if it's fun, perhaps the second most important reason why we collect data is to understand how our oceans and our planet more broadly works. And this is a collective endeavor. And so I would say this, and I know this sounds a little weird to use these kinds of words, but knowledge is saintly, and gathering data itself is a noble cause or goal. Perhaps a more pragmatic way of thinking about what I just said is that even if you don't use the data that you collect, if you make sure that it adheres to common standards and formats, and then it is open and available, someone will use your data, and this will benefit us all. Now, there's also this idea that is sometimes, actually quite often, forgotten. It's forgotten because we swim in ever more data, and the list of papers that we should all read grows and grows, way beyond actually what we can do, what we can accomplish in terms of our reading. And so it's often easy to assume that we know everything. I think back to my education, actually, my master's, my PhD. You were told what we know, right? That's the nature of learning, but it misses the point in a way because more often than not, you're not told what we don't know, and so it's important to remind yourselves of that. So, I urge you to ask any of your mentors or any friends, peers, mentors who are studying something that might interest you. Ask them, what don't we know yet about this problem? The case in point, I was actually visiting my old PhD advisor the other week when I just went on a vacation to go see him and catch up. And I asked him about this amazing project that he's running called Exports. It's about carbon export in the oceans. Something we all learn about from our textbooks. But we talked about this. And I asked him explicitly, what don't we know yet that you're trying to figure out? And he told me a bunch of things. We also talked about kelp farming, actually. Something we know little about. But if you follow the news, you'll know that there's a tremendous amount of energy and funding pouring into carbon dioxide removal technologies, which is amazing. It's such a positive thing. But there's much work to be done to help verify the usefulness of the various proposed methods like kelp farming. And on the topic of carbon, we collect data on the oceans and on our planet so that we can estimate the consequences of our actions, chiefly climate change, just like Payal just explained. So for me, on the left here is a movie of one of the Earth system models that I'm familiar with. It's run out of the Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Lab here in the US. And this model is a codification of our understanding of our planet. And it enables us to perform sensitivity tests. For example, to test how the Earth might warm if the atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations were to increase, or continue to increase. Okay, so we collect data to have fun and to understand. Last but not least, I would say this, we collect data so that we can predict, because predictions are useful. Perhaps the most obvious example in the environmental sciences, broadly speaking, are weather forecasts. Weather forecasts help us minimize the costs of extreme weather events like hurricanes. The better we can predict, or put it this way, the more data we have, the better we can predict, and the more we can minimize the costs of these kinds of events. And now a similar-ish kind of example that I've been working on are harmful algal blooms in lakes and reservoirs. So these aren't saltwater algae, but close enough. Freshwater harmful algal blooms cost water utilities and municipal governments a ton of money every year. And in order to minimize their costs, we work with water utilities to help them guide where and when to monitor in their source waters, so their lakes and reservoirs, to help them avoid being caught by surprise by harmful algal blooms and the toxins that they produce. Now, a closely related reason why we want to predict is because we want to be and need to be able to attribute losses to their causes. And this seems quite jargony, but it's important to understand what I'm talking about. So, for example, on the right, I'm showing you two droughts and their effects. Drought on land, which we're probably much more familiar with, but now there are essentially droughts, or at least heat waves at sea as well. Being able to point to a particular environmental shock, like a drought, means that farmers can actually get insurance to protect themselves from any associated losses. In the sea, however, this doesn't exist, partly because we haven't had the data to verify that a loss, say in terms of a fishery or aquaculture, is associated with this environmental shock. Now, another reason why we want to be able to predict is so that we can plan well. There are numerous examples of this. For example, there are several efforts around the world where scientists use information and data on how ocean currents connect different habitats to help inform where to place marine protected areas. Another example is in the optimal design of offshore aquaculture operations. Aquaculture is the fastest growing food production sector on the planet, and data on ocean conditions can help identify good locations for siting offshore aquaculture farms, those locations that maximize production while minimizing environmental impacts, of course. Okay, so to reiterate, just briefly, we gather data to understand and to predict and have fun. Now, this could be generalized by saying that we collect data essentially to be useful, okay? Now, it's worth thinking about the mechanisms that allow us to be useful. And as scientists, we typically produce peer-reviewed papers, attend conferences, run workshops, and all of this is great. All of this is good. But it's important to recognize that these things pretty much target other scientists. And there are many other stakeholders to think about too. Perhaps policymakers are first and foremost. For example, when I did my PhD at UC Santa Barbara, I was adjacent to a large collective effort by local scientists to help inform what was called the Marine Life Protection Act, which saw in marine protected areas throughout the Californian coastline. Being able to connect with staff at federal agencies like NOAA or state agencies, or even here in the US, politicians, this can be a conduit to impact, connecting your data to outcomes. Another way in which we can be useful is to actually create products or services that are used directly by our stakeholders. So there are many examples of scientists doing this now. And just to mention my little efforts here, I've had a number of really ambitious postdocs come through my lab, and one outcome has been the creation of a SaaS, or software as a service business, built around the harmful algal bloom predictive analytics that we've been providing water utilities throughout the US. So just to give you a bit more information, what we've been doing is developing interpretable artificial intelligence methods, something called rule fit algorithms, for making predictions of these harmful algal blooms based upon a mixture of data, everything from water sample estimates of nutrient concentrations to satellite measurements of chlorophyll A, to weather data, and so on. And we've been providing these results through interactive web geovisualizations. So to end the talk, why do we, again, reiteration, why do we gather data about the oceans? Well, in a nutshell, to have fun, to better understand our planet, and to make accurate predictions. I can end it there, but Chrissy and Kaushal, tell me if I can do this. I actually, well, maybe I can end there. What I did do was, Chrissy sent us a bunch of questions that you, the students, sent them, which I loved actually, and I thought they were really insightful. So I actually put some time to put some slides together to answer them. But maybe I'll stop there, time out, and Chrissy and Kaushal, you can run the show and tell me when we can, if we can answer those questions that were asked online, or any that might be in the chat, or if students here, if you want to just ask verbally as well, of course. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. And you set us up very well. We'll directly go into the Q&A. So let's work with the set of questions that I had sent you previously. And we're also monitoring the chat, and we'll include the questions as they come along. So the first question, let's pick it up from the slide that you had on your screen. What are the emerging areas or topics in the field that you work in?
Payal, do you want to go first? Or do you want me to go?
Go for it. You even have some nice slides to go with the questions. So go for it.
Well, I don't need to show this. Thank you. All right, I'll do that. I won't show the slides because it's just text. I can speak them. But I can make my slides available if anybody wants to see them. So, what are the emerging frontiers? Yeah, answering that question, I was like, what don't we know? So, what I've learned is that everything's connected at some scale. Everything from the physics of the oceans to the chemistry to the biology to the people that live on our coasts, and so forth. And what I've also learned is that everything changes. Everything's dynamic. So if you combine connectivity and dynamics, what you have is a complex system. And so I think so if you Google complex systems, there is actually a very rich literature on complex systems. But what I see as an emerging topic is the application of complex systems theory to not just oceans, but marine systems as coupled natural human systems, and exploring and trying to understand the non-linear dynamics that can happen in such a complex system. So that's number one. Second, yeah, carbon dioxide removal. Let's solve this problem. Okay, let's suck carbon out of the air. We can do this. We can stop emissions. We can suck carbon out of the air. I'm super excited about carbon dioxide removal technologies. It's just blossomed in the last couple of years, at least here in the US, maybe for political reasons. And I'm just so excited about that. And last, third, you can often assume that the solutions are technological in nature, but actually the root cause of all of our problems it comes down to human behavior, actually. And so doing work on understanding how people can cooperate to solve collective action problems, from plastics to fish to carbon dioxide, is a central problem. And this is what economists have been working on for a long time. But if you there are these wonderful interdisciplinary groups where you have oceanographers and ecologists and economists sitting next to each other, trying to solve these kinds of problems. So nonlinear dynamics, carbon dioxide removal, cooperation. Those are my top 3 emerging frontiers.
It's interesting that you mentioned plastics. I want to take the next question up and address it specifically to Payal. So in your work as a climate justice activist and your experience, what do you think is a better strategy? Should we focus more on accelerating towards new technology without worrying too much about the status quo, or should we try to economize our damage to the environment, for example, use of plastic, and let technology evolve at the pace that it is currently going?
So, as I think James said in the end that there is often this focus on technology, but there's other aspects. And I think it's the same thing. Thus far, look, we actually know what we have to do since a long time, right? You have to keep it in the ground. I mean, it's nothing new actually. But we have a system in which there are vested interests that don't want to do it. We can also look at what's happening in Ukraine, and these are the kind of situations that we're moving towards, where you're going to have potentially resource wars, where people are going to use their might to use that last ounce or drop of oil for themselves, but not for everybody else. And I would really argue that, I'm not against technology. I mean, I've got my phone, I've got my computer. We can use technology for good, we can use it for bad, but to depend on that to get us out of this quagmire is absolutely problematic. The number of schemes for carbon dioxide removal, many of them have not proven to work. And even CCS, which has been worked on for a long time, it's not been, we don't have an example that completely works yet. So there is a role for technology, of course, and we're going to need it because we already are very close to being above 1.5 degrees Celsius. And for those of you that are in India, Pakistan, I'm really sorry. I was there in March and April. This is ridiculous, but this is what is coming. So I would say, let's look at, we know what we have to do. Sure, have technology have a role, but really, we need to keep it in the ground, and we need to ensure that we can get renewable energy, in particular to the communities that have not caused this problem, because it is doable, and the price there that is also a technological solution.
Okay, thank you. The both of you emphasized on the human component of the problem. So my next question would be, how important is collaborating and team building, and how does one go about doing it?
Should we just keep this order going? It's 100% completely important. There is no project that I've been involved in of any importance that hasn't been interdisciplinary, and hasn't involved a number of scientists from different backgrounds, and also other folks, policymakers, artists, even folks on the humanities. I've tried actually. I tried writing a solo author paper, and it was super boring. Don't do it. It's like well, no, I shouldn't say it. Do it. If you want to do it. But like, for me, it was really boring. So I'm just looking at, so how important is collaboration? 100%. I'm reading the questions that was put online. So what skills are required for team building that might not be part of a standard scientific curriculum? Is it okay if I answer that one? Because I think it's important. I suffer from a problem that I think a lot of scientists do, which is I can be quite arrogant in my field. It just comes from, like, you study really hard and you get really good at what you do. And at some point you realize you are an expert in this field. And so it's very easy to become quite arrogant. But in the words of one of my mentors, who wasn't speaking directly to me, but he was asked this question in an auditorium, and he said, "Be humble. Practice being humble. You don't know everything. Even in, like, the obvious confrontation between the sort of quantitative hard sciences and the qualitative humanities. There's often like, oh, you know, like they don't test hypotheses or things like that. Like, be humble. You don't know everything. Try and get along. And then the other ones, the other two things I thought of were, yeah, practice confessing naivety. It's okay. Like, stand up and say, I have no idea what you're saying. Like, politely. Practice saying it politely. I have no idea what's going on here. Please help me out. And to learn how to end meetings. This seems like stupid, but that's one of the most effective things you could learn. How to run meetings, start meetings, run meetings, but importantly, end meetings on time. Sorry, that's
Maybe if I can just jump in quickly on that. Absolutely. I mean, absolutely collaboration. And when you are, the issue that we have is there's a huge power imbalance in the world. And the reason that when we get huge social change happening, it's usually because a number of people have banded together, whether it's India getting its independence or women in Ireland having the right to an abortion, is because a number of people have come together so that they can kind of topple the powers. And so it's human behavior, but it's not individual human behavior. We have a structural problem in the world. And so I think that's important to remember, that it's not about, like, yes, of course, try to eat as much plant-based as you can, try not to fly, but beyond that, it's a structural issue. And I would say, I think it's about, yes, being humble, but like learning how to work in a group with others. How do you take decisions? Yes, having a clear process, having a clear way of running a meeting. For those of you that are interested, I actually do online trainings as well as in-person trainings about that, from big organizations such as Amnesty International to local groups in slums in Bombay. So you can always contact me for an online training.
We have a follow-up question along the same lines. What is the role that corporates can play to support these causes? And apart from obviously controlling their carbon emissions, and what are the current avenues of collaboration across academia, industry? Your thoughts on this? Both of you.
Well, I mean, there's the elephant in the room, or the elephant that's often not invited to the meeting, right? I don't know, as an academic, like the number of meetings that I've attended that hasn't had a representation of industry is the majority of the meetings that I've been in. I've been privileged to see scientists work on this, and so I put in the chat, there's this amazing initiative that came out of Stockholm University, the Stockholm Resilience Center, focused on fisheries, involved oceanographers, but it was basically designed the goal was to bring the leaders of the biggest transnational fisheries corporations together and start working together, getting them working together for ocean sustainability. And that's the kind of thing that we need to see. How do we do that with the carbon industry, fossil fuel industry? Yeah, like Payal said, there's a vested interest not to do that. It's very, look, we can drill into this. It's actually very challenging because private organized firms, companies, they live and breathe in a competitive marketplace. And so actually the way you get them to do things is to understand how the market forces, market incentives. And that's why governments are so important. That's why social norms are so important. Governments can put in a carbon tax, and that changes the market structure so that companies are incentivized to be carbon neutral or carbon negative even. Social norms are important because people buy products from these companies. What's your social norm? Is it to eat as much meat as you can, or is it to eat less meat? So these are the bookends of the structures that control companies essentially. And there's a huge literature on fields unto themselves on how we can get policy made and how we can incentivize individuals to make choices that promote sustainability within the corporations that produce products and services that people use. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there can be a role for all actors, but as an activist and working on fighting the fossil fuel industry, all we've seen is lies, deception, um, vested interest. When I was the program director at 350.org, an international climate campaigning organization, we got a PINA. We were subpoenaed, and that is actually because we had submitted a brief to the U.S. government, and one of the Texan House of Representatives was very close to Exxon and showed it to them, and he did Exxon's dirty work of getting us tied up in the courts. On the other hand, what has been very exciting is some of the smaller renewable energy firms who are on the cutting edge because they're small and they're innovative. And we've been able to do some good work with them in places like India, but also South Africa, Brazil. You kind of have these barefoot engineers who have worked on scaling up getting renewable energy, in particular solar, to rural communities. So I think there's a role, but some of them, well, for some of them, there's not. And in general, the larger the corporation and the more that it's on the manufacturing side of heavy materials, they don't want to change. And they're very good at being polluters, and they have a lot of friends in high places. We know that Kaushal, of course, in India with the Ambanis and Adanis.
So I'd like to ask one of the questions from the chat, and what you're bringing up is really important. And I think there's also some desire from students and early career folks to think about how can we get involved and what can we do. So one of the questions in the chat is, what suggestions do you have for scientists who want to get involved in applying data and our science to applied issues? This person says that they work on HABs, harmful algal blooms, to make connections with people and organizations who could make good use of our science and data knowledge. I think in particular, Payal, maybe as you answer this question, think about one thing we run into as scientists is this need to be objective, or this neutrality that we're supposed to maintain. And so for me, one of the things that comes to mind also is how can I support activist work and maintain my integrity or my chops as a scientist?
Yeah, and I think James will also have good inputs on that because of the work he's done from that perspective. But look, this is what I would say is you have to decide what you're comfortable with your stance. When I decided to leave science, it was also because I was interviewing at an Ivy League for a professor position, and I was told by the head, if I got this, I would not be able to do my activism anymore. And, but that was also, I finished my PhD over 20 years ago. And now I see the next generation of scientists who are speaking out, including a friend of mine here in Switzerland. When we were postdocs together, he's like, oh, you can't do that, you can't do that. And now he's one of the leading scientific voices. So I think for me, being objective does not, neutral. I mean, you have to decide, are you okay with the tactics and the way that organization campaigns? Maybe you are, but you don't want to be your name associated, and you do it just behind the scenes. Or you say, yes, I actually stand for that. And I think the fact that you've got this Extinction Rebellion or Scientists for Future, where some of them have decided to go and do civil disobedience, I personally, of course I'm biased, think because you are actually making these decisions on the understanding of the data, it's causing you to shift, not because you're not neutral, it's because you actually understand what is in front of you. And in terms of finding it, I mean, depending on what you do, I assume, you write someone like James. If you're working on harmful algal blooms, you look in the internet, you call up organizations, you find out in your community where you live that maybe it's one of the issues for the local council. And one of my colleagues I just saw, he is a great communications expert for campaigns, but now he lives in a small town in New Hampshire, and they want to they want to rezone a park. So he's being a local activist, and he's going out there. But I would say, the data, that's what's causing you to act. And what does it mean to be neutral? As Howard Zinn, a US historian, amazing person, said, you can't be neutral on a moving train.
Thanks, Payal. That's cool. Howard Zinn.
Payal, right now you talked about being passionate about a certain cause, irrespective of your vocation or inclinations. While tackling the issues that you encounter, you try to first gauge how much efforts it would take, or how many resources which you'll have to dispose of to tackle a particular issue, or is it purely passion driven and you think about the resources later?
So I used to just jump in, and then as I became more and more responsible for either working with the Adivasis in India or a larger staff, and older, definitely think about what is some mapping, where is there an in, where can we create pressure to shift power, where can we not, do we have the people behind us, do we not? No, definitely you have to, because unfortunately there's so many problems in the world and we only have so much energy. And sometimes, there's a problem where I know the way in which I'm going to fight it. And maybe for that problem, it's not the best way. And maybe it's better that it's an ecosystem approach. Be in touch with another group. Maybe it's an inside group that only does inside lobbying. Maybe it is actually a rich funder. I don't know. Maybe it is small companies. But that's why I think it's very important to realize we need many different ways of fighting, changing things, even doing research, right? If everybody was a field scientist and nobody was a modeler. And I think it's that learning and appreciation that we need all of that. And so how do we make the best use of that? And as James said, you don't know everything and you can't do everything.
Keeping in line with what James mentioned, that meeting should end on time. I have one last question for the both of you. We're doing this meeting on Zoom and our world is moving towards a more and more digital one. In today's world, how important is it to have a social media presence, and how does one go about building one as an early career professional or as a student?
Can I go first? Payal, do you want to go answer? Okay. Personally, I hate social media. The positive benefits I would gain from using social media are minuscule compared to the negative impacts on my mental health and actually my productivity. So I don't use social media at all. This is just personal. I realize I am an anomaly here. Within academia, all I can say, the things that I do or that I judge or see are important. Yes, you need a website, and actually things like blogs, online essays, so not peer reviewed, but just some sort of digital footprint for your ideas and your thoughts can be very powerful as well. I'm just not in the habit of tweeting. While I'm here, I just want to say one thing to one of the previous questions, and yeah, I'm breaking my rule of going over time. It's about how do we connect with, how do we do stuff? And I think it's really important because with this, we've talked about data, and there's a seduction actually to data from our end. We think we have a solution without even identifying a problem first. And for me, the most important thing has been to go out into the world to public meetings that are not science conferences, but public meetings, talking with folks and asking them, what is your need? What is the problem that you can't solve right now? And work back from there to go, okay, this is the data that I have, this is the analysis that I need, and this was the result that will solve the problem for you. So yeah, getting out of the ivory tower very much is a way to start solving problems. Okay, I'll shut up. Thank you.
So I love that, James. I think that is like, exactly, that's a great way of doing things. And that's how I work with meeting with indigenous communities and such. Look, I think James is absolutely right. For the most part, social media is a waste of time. And both for your mental health as well as productivity. I was never on it until I became an independent consultant. And then at some point I realized it doesn't make me feel good. So now I'm on it, but I don't look at it every day. And it's when I have written an article or something, which I agree is much better to do. I put it out. Every once in a while I engage, but I actually track the time, and I have a deal with my husband that it cannot be more than 20 minutes a day, and it's usually much less. So I totally agree. I also agree with write your ideas, write blogs, combine your work and how that relates to the rest of the world. Use things like Medium. Yeah, very much agree. It's not
Well, while both our panelists have insisted that you should not spend a lot of time on social media, I've still put their Twitter handles, James's lab's Twitter handle and Payal's Twitter handle, along with the Oceanography Society's Twitter handle in the chat. Please do follow our efforts if you like this panel discussion, and I'll hand over things to Chrissy now to conclude.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was it was so wonderful to hear from both of you. Thank you so much to the folks that are participating in the chat. I'm really excited to be able to, that we'll be able to put this recording on YouTube and make it a resource for TOS student members and the public. I just have a couple of closing remarks, mostly thank yous. I want to say a big thank you to the TOS Council and to Jenny for making this event possible, as well as Ellen Capel and Johanna Adams for helping us out with communications for this event. And then thank you to all of the TOS committee members, the student committee members, with a special thanks to Kaushal, Tamara, and Prem. I'm so happy with how this event has gone and so happy with the turnout that we've had. Like, thank you so much, everybody. And let's hope we can keep this going. I have some conversations going in the chat about potential future events we could run, maybe a discussion about what it means to be biased and how we think about those things, and maybe a discussion about social media use for scientists. And then lastly, I just want to introduce that we have a new TOS student rep that's going to be Josette McLean. She'll be taking over sometime this summer. I'm kind of helping out in the bridge because she's out doing awesome fieldwork collecting data. So we'll be in touch. Check out the TOS.org website, become a member, and keep up with us so that we can keep working on these topics together. Thank you so much.
Right on. Thanks so much, Chrissy.
Thank you very much.
Payal, Jenny. See ya. Get in touch,
Bye.
anyone who wants to. You can find me on the internet. On social media. See ya. Bye.